The sweet poison. How praise became man's greatest weakness. Michael sat in his therapist's office, finally speaking the words that had haunted him for months. "I think my wife has been training me like a dog, and I've been wagging my tail the entire time." At 34, this accomplished engineer had just realized that 20 years of female praise had systematically stripped away his backbone, his ambition, and his ability to think independently, all while making him believe he was loved and appreciated. What Michael had stumbled upon was a psychological mechanism that Sigmund Freud identified over a century ago, but that modern society has weaponized beyond his darkest predictions. Freud understood that praise, when strategically deployed, becomes the most powerful tool of behavioral control. More effective than punishment, more insidious than manipulation, more addictive than any drug ever created. The father of psychoanalysis recognized that human beings, particularly men seeking approval and validation, become psychologically dependent on positive reinforcement in ways that fundamentally alter their personality, their goals, and their capacity for independent thought. But what Freud couldn't have foreseen was how this natural psychological vulnerability would be exploited on a massive scale to create generations of neutered, compliant men who mistake psychological manipulation for love. Have you ever noticed how a single compliment from a woman can change your entire mood and decision-making process for days? Michael's journey into this psychological prison began innocently enough, as it does for millions of men worldwide. As a young boy, he learned that when he was good, when he was quiet, compliant, helpful, and non-threatening, the women in his life showered him with praise and affection. His mother beamed when he helped with dishes instead of playing outside with other boys. His teachers favored him when he sat still and followed instructions rather than challenging authority or exploring his natural curiosity. This early conditioning created what Freud called the pleasure principle, the unconscious drive to seek immediate gratification and avoid discomfort. Michael's developing psyche learned to associate female approval with safety, love, and self-worth, while female disapproval triggered anxiety, shame, and the desperate need to modify his behavior to regain that precious validation. By adolescence, this pattern had become deeply ingrained. Michael found himself automatically adjusting his opinions, his interests, and even his personality based on what earned him praise from girls and women. He learned to suppress his natural assertiveness, his competitive instincts, his desire to take risks and push boundaries, all because these traits occasionally earned him criticism or disapproval from the opposite sex. Freud understood that this kind of conditioning doesn't just change behavior, it changes identity. The boy who learns that his worth depends on female approval doesn't just act differently. He becomes a different person, one whose sense of self is entirely dependent on external validation rather than internal conviction and authentic self-expression. In college, Michael's conditioning deepened. He chose his major partly based on what impressed the women he wanted to date. He developed interests in art, literature, and social causes, not because they genuinely excited him, but because expressing these interests earned him praise for being sensitive and evolved, code words that he later realized meant safely non-threatening to female control. The insidious nature of this psychological manipulation is that it feels like love. When Sarah, his future wife, praised him for being such a good listener and so different from other guys, Michael felt seen and appreciated. What he didn't realize was that he was being rewarded for suppressing the very qualities that would have made him attractive as a genuine partner rather than a controllable companion. Freud wrote extensively about what he called transference, the unconscious redirection of feelings from one person to another. Michael had transferred his childhood need for maternal approval onto every woman he encountered, making him psychologically incapable of relating to women as equals rather than as sources of validation whose approval he desperately needed to feel complete. The pattern intensified after marriage. Sarah's praise became the drug that Michael didn't realize he was addicted to. "You're such a good husband for doing the dishes without being asked. I love how you always put my needs first. You're so much more mature than those other men who are still trying to prove themselves." Each compliment felt like love, but Michael was slowly recognizing that it was actually reinforcement designed to shape his behavior in specific directions. Freud understood that the human psyche seeks consistency and will modify reality to match existing beliefs rather than confronting uncomfortable truths. Michael had built his entire sense of self around being the good guy who earned female approval through compliance and self-sacrifice. To question this identity meant confronting the possibility that everything he believed about love, relationships, and his own worth was fundamentally flawed. Can you think of a time when you changed your opinion or behavior specifically to earn praise from a woman even though it went against your instincts? The awakening began when Michael noticed that his career had stagnated while his more problematic colleagues, men who were willing to be assertive, take risks, and occasionally displease people, continued to advance. He realized that the same traits that earned him praise at home for being low maintenance and considerate were the exact traits that made him invisible and ineffective in the professional world. Freud believed that psychological health required the integration of what he called the reality principle, the ability to delay immediate gratification in service of long-term goals and authentic self-expression. Michael began to see that his addiction to female praise had trapped him in a perpetual state of seeking immediate validation rather than building genuine competence, character, and achievement. The more Michael examined his relationship patterns, the more he recognized the sophisticated behavioral modification system that had been operating beneath his conscious awareness. Sarah's praise wasn't random or spontaneous. It was strategically deployed to reinforce behaviors that made him more manageable, more predictable, and more dependent on her approval for his sense of self-worth. When he worked late to advance his career, he received subtle criticism about work-life balance and priorities. When he succeeded, the praise focused on how his success reflected well on their relationship, rather than acknowledging his individual achievement. When he expressed opinions that differed from hers, he was met with disappointment and the withdrawal of affection until he modified his position to earn back her approval. Freud wrote about the castration complex, not just a literal fear, but the psychological emasculation that occurs when men surrender their authentic power in exchange for safety and approval. Michael realized that years of praise-based conditioning had achieved exactly this result. He had become psychologically castrated, unable to access his natural assertiveness, ambition, and independence. The philosopher understood that this dynamic creates what he called neurosis, a persistent state of psychological conflict where the individual's authentic desires are at war with their conditioned responses. Michael found himself simultaneously craving female approval and resenting his dependence on it, wanting to assert himself while fearing the loss of validation that assertion might bring. The turning point came during a work crisis when Michael's natural instincts told him to take a bold action that would advance his career but might displease his wife. For the first time in years, he chose to trust his own judgment rather than seek Sarah's approval. The decision led to a significant promotion, but Sarah's response was telling. Instead of celebrating his success, she expressed concern about how the new responsibilities might affect their relationship. Michael began to see the pattern with startling clarity. Female praise had been the invisible leash that kept him within acceptable boundaries, preventing him from fully developing his potential or pursuing his authentic goals. The very women who claimed to want strong, successful men had systematically reinforced behaviors that ensured he would never become genuinely strong or independently successful. Freud believed that awareness was the first step towards psychological freedom, but he also understood that breaking free from deeply ingrained patterns requires confronting significant anxiety and discomfort. Michael discovered that reducing his dependence on female approval triggered feelings of isolation, self-doubt, and the fear that he might be fundamentally unlovable without his people-pleasing persona. The withdrawal process was more difficult than he had anticipated. Like any addiction, his dependence on praise had physical and psychological components. When he stopped automatically seeking Sarah's approval for his decisions, when he began expressing opinions that might displease her, when he started prioritizing his own goals alongside hers, He experienced genuine anxiety and the fear that he was becoming selfish or difficult. But Freud understood that this discomfort was necessary for psychological growth. The anxiety of authentic choice and independent action, while uncomfortable, was far healthier than the false peace of constant approval seeking. Michael began to rediscover aspects of his personality that had been suppressed for decades. His natural competitiveness, his desire to take risks, his willingness to disagree and stand firm in his convictions. What parts of your authentic personality have you suppressed because they didn't earn you the praise and approval you were seeking? The transformation wasn't just personal, it was relational. As Michael became less dependent on Sarah's approval, their dynamic began to shift in unexpected ways. Initially, she increased her efforts to regain control, alternating between criticism designed to make him doubt himself and increased praise to lure him back into the familiar pattern of dependency. But something remarkable happened as Michael developed genuine self-confidence based on his own achievements and convictions, rather than external validation. Sarah began to respect him in ways she never had when he was constantly seeking her approval. The very independence that she had unconsciously worked to prevent actually made him more attractive to her, not less. Freud understood that healthy relationships require two psychologically complete individuals, rather than one person seeking completion through another's approval. Michael learned that the goal wasn't to reject all feedback or become indifferent to his partner's feelings, but to approach relationships from a position of strength rather than neediness, offering genuine partnership rather than seeking constant validation. The broader implications of Michael's discovery extend far beyond his personal situation. Freud recognized that entire societies could become neurotic when natural human drives are systematically suppressed or redirected. Modern culture has created a generation of men who have been conditioned to see their natural assertiveness, ambition, and independence as toxic traits to be overcome, rather than essential aspects of masculinity to be developed and channeled constructively. The praise-based conditioning that Michael experienced isn't accidental or unconscious. It's a systematic process that begins in childhood and continues throughout men's lives, creating males who are easier to control, less threatening to established power structures, and more dependent on others for their sense of identity and worth. Freud believed that psychological health required what he called sublimation, the channeling of natural drives into productive and socially beneficial activities. But modern conditioning teaches men to suppress rather than sublimate their natural drives, creating internal conflicts that manifest as anxiety, depression, and the sense that they're living inauthentic lives. Michael's journey towards psychological independence wasn't about rejecting women or becoming indifferent to relationships. It was about approaching them from wholeness rather than neediness, offering genuine strength rather than performing compliance, creating authentic partnerships rather than seeking approval-based validation. The philosopher understood that breaking free from conditioning requires more than just awareness. It requires the courage to tolerate the anxiety and discomfort that comes with authentic choice and independent action. Michael had to learn to validate himself, to trust his own judgment, to pursue his own goals even when others didn't understand or approve. This process revealed something that Freud had identified, but that modern psychology often overlooks: the difference between genuine confidence and performed confidence. Michael had spent years performing the kind of confidence that earned him praise, self-deprecating, non-threatening, always deferential to others' feelings and opinions. But genuine confidence, he discovered, was quiet, internal, and completely independent of others' approval. The transformation affected every area of Michael's life. In his career, he began taking calculated risks and advocating for himself in ways that led to rapid advancement. In his friendships, he stopped being the perpetual people-pleaser and started expressing authentic opinions, which paradoxically deepened his relationships with people who appreciated honesty over agreeability. Most importantly, Michael developed what Freud called the autonomous ego, the ability to make decisions based on rational analysis and authentic values rather than the unconscious drive to earn approval or avoid disapproval. This psychological independence didn't make him isolated or selfish. It made him capable of genuine intimacy because he no longer needed others to complete him or validate his worth. The irony that Freud would have appreciated is that men who are least dependent on female approval often receive the most genuine respect and attraction from women. The desperate need for validation that praise conditioning creates is itself unattractive, while the quiet confidence of psychological independence is naturally magnetic. Michael learned that the highest form of love isn't the kind that requires you to diminish yourself to receive it, but the kind that appreciates and celebrates your authentic strength and independence. The woman who truly values you doesn't want to control you through praise and criticism. She wants to partner with you as an equal, each bringing your complete selves to the relationship. Freud's ultimate insight was that psychological health requires the courage to be yourself, even when being yourself doesn't earn you immediate approval or validation. The man who has learned to validate himself becomes capable of offering others genuine acceptance, rather than seeking to extract validation from them. The praise that had once felt like love revealed itself to be a sophisticated form of control, a way of ensuring that Michael remained safely within boundaries that served others' comfort, rather than his own growth and authentic expression. Breaking free from this control wasn't about becoming indifferent to others' feelings, but about refusing to sacrifice his authentic self for the temporary pleasure of approval. The journey towards psychological independence is ongoing, not a destination, but a way of living. Michael still sometimes feels the pull toward approval seeking, the temptation to modify his behavior, to earn praise rather than staying true to his convictions. But he has developed what Freud called psychological resilience, the ability to tolerate disapproval, when disapproval is the price of authenticity. If this resonates with your own experience, if you've recognized the subtle ways that praise has been used to shape your behavior and limit your potential, don't let this awareness go to waste. Share this with someone who needs to understand the difference between genuine appreciation and behavioral control. Subscribe to join a community of men committed to psychological independence rather than approval seeking. Like this video, if you believe that authentic strength is more valuable than comfortable compliance, the path forward requires what Freud called therapeutic courage, the willingness to examine your own psychological patterns honestly, even when that examination reveals uncomfortable truths about how you've been controlled or limited by your need for others' approval. Your worth is not determined by how much praise you receive or how well you conform to others' expectations of what you should be. Your value comes from your authentic character, your genuine achievements, your willingness to be yourself, even when being yourself is difficult or unpopular. The praise that feels so good in the moment often comes at the cost of long-term growth, authentic achievement, and genuine self-respect. Learning to distinguish between appreciation that celebrates your authentic qualities and praise that rewards your compliance is essential for psychological health and genuine relationships. The goal isn't to become immune to positive feedback or indifferent to others' feelings. It's to develop the internal strength and self-validation that allows you to appreciate genuine recognition while remaining unmoved by praise designed to control your behavior. Michael's transformation from praise-addicted people-pleaser to psychologically independent man represents the possibility that exists for every man willing to examine his own conditioning and make the difficult choice to value authenticity over approval. The sweet poison of manipulative praise can be neutralized, but only through the development of genuine self-knowledge, authentic self-confidence, and the courage to be yourself regardless of others' reactions. This is the freedom that Freud envisioned. Not freedom from connection, but freedom within connection. The ability to love and be loved without losing yourself in the process. Your authentic self, the man you are when you're not performing for anyone's approval, is worth more than all the praise you could ever accumulate through compliance and self-suppression. The journey back to that authentic self is challenging but essential, difficult but ultimately liberating. Choose authenticity over approval. Choose genuine strength over comfortable compliance. Choose psychological independence over the temporary pleasure of praise-based validation. This choice made repeatedly in small moments and major decisions, is what transforms boys into men and approval seekers into genuinely attractive, psychologically healthy individuals. The woman who will truly value you is waiting not for your compliance but for your authentic strength. But first, you must reclaim that strength from the subtle prison of praise-based conditioning that has kept it locked away.